And we are live. Well, welcome back to the Depths of Healthcare podcast. This is your host, Ben, here with our esteemed guest today, Loyd, CEO and leader of Innovar Healthcare. Loyd, why don't you let the people know, kind of introduce yourself, tell us how you came to lead this business, and kind of where we're at in this type of industry and what niche you're kind of filling.
Certainly. So by history and background, I have spent a number of years in clinical systems on both the hospital side as well as the software side of the house. Several years back, and also a lot of my background is in is in open source software. I started in open source software in 1997.
Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, I actually saw a speaker. His name was Eric S. Raymond at Auburn University many years ago, in a little bitty classroom. That's before Eric blew up to be what some would argue to be the father of open source. I saw him in a small classroom with 15 developers doing a small presentation, and it resonated with me. He wrote a book, Cathedral and the Bazaar, that really set the tone for me in relation to open source software. And so out of that, I've worked for a number of companies involved in open source. MedSphere was one of those, and they did an open source EMR, electronic medical record system, back in the mid 2000s. And I came out of that, working with that company, came to know this small little open source product called Mirth Connect. And Mirth Connect was, and at the time I had been heavily involved in interface engines. I worked with a number of the different brands out there, the big logos, and I downloaded Mirth Connect, and I thought, wow, this is going to change everything. This will disrupt this business. That's exactly what happened. And fortunately, was able I came to know the Takaro brothers, the original founders of, at the time was WebReach. They went on to become Mirth. Eventually went to work for them and was there for several years. I worked with them through, initially at Mirth and then on into the acquisition by NextGen Healthcare. Was there a number of years after the acquisition, and then in 2018 left NextGen and formed Innovar Healthcare. And that's my journey from a hospital programmer to now the CEO of Innovar. Our focus at Innovar is really all about moving data, and we primarily in the healthcare space. There's a number of data silos in healthcare, and so what we do is write software and build custom solutions that move data. And we move data from any source to any destination in any format. We have a number of products and services that center around that focus area. And it's all really about, well, early on, it was about Mirth Connect, now BridgeLink, and we could talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah. But, we have a number of products and services. It includes plugins, services, support, you name it. That's what we do.
And so that kind of describes Innovar Healthcare as kind of core being to kind of the outside world. What do you think kind of sets it apart from an interoperability or EHR integration vendor standpoint? How does it separate you with being with Innovar?
There are a number of big network players out there. The usual suspects, the Health Gorillas, Redox, LK, No2, just to name a few. And those vendors are all centered around network, and they're I call them the big network providers. They'll exchange documents with you. They'll help facilitate, even do some storage of that data. They provide common API gateways, that kind of stuff. But it's really about exchange at scale, and that's not really where we focus at Innovar. Where we focus is on what I call the last mile, that field level detail that is critical in healthcare. For example, I need to know your glucose was 400. What you're going to get with those bigger providers is you're going to get a document, and maybe on the second page of that document under a summary section, you may get a glucose level, and it may or may not be coded. What you'll get with our software is that field level detail that you can insert into your data set. And that's I would say for me, that's our key differentiator.
Yeah, so you feel like your system really kind of brings out that really, really minutia of detail, but very important details that help providers to make these decisions and
Most
kind of
definitely.
make sure there's documentation. How do you think, tell me more about kind of talking about like Lightswitch and
Yeah,
how that
sure.
improves the everyday experience of clinicians, healthcare systems.
So let's talk light switch. So let's back up a bit and let's talk a minute about to give you some context about what light
Sure.
switch is. So at our center is the open source Mirth Connect platform, and now with the fork that was made available or made known last March, it's BridgeLink. Layered around BridgeLink is our plugins and other add-on enterprise level software. Then layered outside of that is our managed service, and that's called Lightswitch. And that Lightswitch is a managed service, turnkey, white glove integration. You know what you really want to do as a provider, as a hospital administrator, as a
Mm-hmm.
CEO of a digital health company. What you really want to do is not worry about the wiring and the plumbing, and that's what Innovar
Mm-hmm.
does. We
Mm-hmm.
do the wiring and the plumbing. What you really want to do is just turn the lights on, and that's what Lightswitch enables. So we have a library of interfaces to various, to usually your Athenas, your Cerners, your Epics,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have methodologies that really are all about scale, and we want to do rapid deployment. You know, most interfaces, 80% of it we hope our goal is 80% of an interface, a connection to various systems will be standardized. Now we have that outer layer, that 20%, that frankly is always a challenge. We hope to reduce that number. You know, our goal is to drive down that 20% of custom stuff that you have to do for every single vendor. We hope to get that lower and lower. But right now it's at about 80%. And so we reuse through our library. And so if you're a provider and you want to say typical use case for a provider is, you know, I want an interface with my laboratory so I don't have to manually enter my orders, and I want to have results come back from my lab and I want that to go into my EMR. That is very typical.
Mm-hmm.
Great, we can do that for you. But 80% of that's going to come out of the Lightswitch library. The
Mm-hmm.
other 20% custom mappings, just small custom tweaks that just simply has to be done as part of the implementation.
I gotcha. Are these now? You mentioned kind of something about we'll call it the last mile. I think that's what you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
What are some last mile challenges that Innovar helps solve for these different health systems?
Well, ethnicity, gender, marital status, religion, those common we call, you know, key value pairs where, you know, you have glucose is another example of a lab
Mm-hmm.
test, right? Glucose, what you really need is the loink, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what we can provide you, you know, is a mapping so that you have glucose, we can map it such that it standardizes on the loink. So the loink is what's passed, the glucose is what's displayed. And that's what our software does. Or say your laboratory system can only accept a 10 digit or 12 digit medical record number, right?
Mm.
And you're sending a 14 digit or a 16 digit. And so we can manage those types of, we call them transforms. They're relatively
Mm-hmm.
common. But I think that the most important piece of this is the mapping. And that's where a lot of the work is.
Yeah, yeah. And do you feel like that's where you separate yourself from these other vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the there's really a couple of different components to an interface. First is the communication mechanism. How are we going to
Totally.
communicate? How do we establish connectivity? Right. And then the second piece is the filters, the transforms, and the mappings that are common in every interface. And there's really two separate pieces. Where we're bringing value is we're not, you know, our company does not, we're not going to build that interface over and over again. So we're not going to write those communication pieces
Yep.
over and over again. We're not going
Yep.
to write the filters, transforms, and logic required for that interface each time we do it. We're going to go to our library. We're going to pull back the predefined logic that is existent, and we've reused it many times. And then key here is we parameterize it. You know, we're going to parameterize those. We're going to put them in a configuration map. And so instead of writing logic for it, we're going to have it as a parameter stored. And so now it's just a setting.
And
And
so why don't you help define what parameterizing means for the general public?
yeah. Sorry, I get super techie sometimes.
I
It's a
know.
you know
It's easy to.
it's a highly technical topic. Okay, so username and password. Right? Every API has either a username, password, or some type of token or some other mechanism for accessing that API. That has to be secured. Well, typically you put it into the logic of the interface, right? Or you put it in some other location. We store it as a parameter. And what effectively is a parameter store. And so we're going to access that and have the logic to access that parameter built into the interface, but then the actual variable itself will already be built there. We'll just call that variable. So each client has a new username, password, or new token. We're just going to insert that using the variable and not have to rewrite that logic every time. That's one good example. And then, with BridgeLink, and we can get into BridgeLink as well. With our BridgeLink product, we introduced a new concept called the dynamic lookup gateway. And so, oftentimes to build the mappings, there's custom logic that you have to write. With the dynamic lookup gateway, we actually created a easy widget type next done setup such that you can access those mappings without having to write the logic. And it's all about efficiency. How do you help these programmers to become uber efficient such that we're not having to recreate the wheel every time we do a new connection to a provider or to a lab or to a health information exchange?
Totally. It's just efficiency.
That's it. And that's really all about scalable efficiency. That's really what it's all.
Yep. And how does would you say that BridgeLink and Mirth are running similar pathways, or is BridgeLink like the new version of Mirth, or what's your take on all that?
So to give the listeners a brief background on Mirth, a lot of folks have heard about it, but Mirth Connect is an open source project that is widely used in the healthcare community, not just in the United States, but it's around the world. I would guess there's north of 1 million installs of the Mirth Connect suite, Mirth Connect product.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all open source. And so the company was heavy into open source, and they led with open source. And they use Mirth Connect as a low barrier to entry. There's minimal cost. You can deploy Mirth Connect, and then that would lead them plant seeds and gives them segues into selling the larger health information exchange and clinical data repository suites that they really wanted to do. Right, so it was essentially a loss leader, and that's what Mirth was. That's the history. It's an interface engine, essentially. It's an interface engine. Moving forward, earlier this year, and more history. NextGen bought Mirth. I was there when the acquisition happened.
Mm-hmm.
NextGen is a proprietary electronic medical record vendor for doctors' offices, practices. They do a lot. I mean, they also have practice management modules as well.
Mm-hmm.
They bought Mirth to complement their existing and use some of the technologies in the Mirth platforms in their EHR product. And so fast forward to today, earlier this year, NextGen had decided to move away from the open source platform, move away from the open source concept and move toward a closed platform. And so, which meant they were moving it from open to closed, and the community would no longer have access to this open source product. And, that had global implications.
Mm-hmm.
Mirth is everywhere, and your users would be shocked at the number of very large vendors that use Mirth to do their interfaces.
Yep.
And it's funny, you think these big companies, these big software vendors would have their own platforms, but they wouldn't. They would just use Mirth. And so with closing that all was, and for Innovar, it was a threat to our business because we were centered around Mirth. We were all in on that open source platform. Our entire business was built on that platform. And we did plugins for it, we did services, we did support. It was all about Mirth. That was our focus. Well, out of a need to continue to do business, we made the decision in February to what's called fork the Mirth platform. So we took the open source Mirth, and that was freely available up through version 4.5.2, and we created a copy of it and then started our own fork, which meant, and then we renamed that product. It
Yeah.
took out all of the branding for Next Gen, replaced it with Innovar branding, and then
Hmm.
created our own version, which was called BridgeLink. And
Hmm.
it has been, and we released that on March the 18th of this year. And then, we had about a 30-day time window to do this conversion, to do this work. And that involved a lot of late nights and a lot of weekends, because at the time we weren't sure what Next Gen was going to handle this closing of the source. Would we still have access to some of the key components that were needed?
Totally.
And we just had no idea. It was a big unknown. It's not like I can call NextGen and ask them, because they're not going to tell me. And,
Right.
if I tip my hand there, then they may close early. And it was a threat. And so we decided to keep it top secret, to fork it, to do all the components that were proprietary and leading up to that March 18th. We had to rewrite those. And then on March 18th, we released those under the BridgeLink brand that included a comparable download page, comparable plugins. Essentially, it's an easy lift to go from Mirth to BridgeLink.
But this is still open source, and that's the importance of developing this.
Yeah, and it is important, not just for us as a company, but for any user of Mirth around the globe.
Hmm.
You can go to our website today. You can go to products and then to BridgeLink and scroll down, and there's a downloads link. You can go there, and that software is available to you today. Just first version was 4.5.3. We've since released the next version, which is 4.5.4. And that's
Hmm.
available to you. We also have links to our code repositories. You can download those, look at our code, look at what we're working on. We are open about our work, and
Yeah.
and you
Which
can
is
stay.
unique in this hemisphere, is what I'm understanding from what you're
It is
telling me.
very much so.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
our approach and our thoughts around open source is, the value is not in the software. It's not in the code. The value is in the community. And I think that's one of the gaps that I saw with NextGen is, they really did not foster a relationship with the community, with the open source community, with the users of the product. And so oftentimes contributors would send code back to NextGen to be incorporated into the product, and NextGen would just ignore it. And that was they had no mechanism for accepting contributions from the community. And that's one example, kind of a larger lack of engagement for the open source community, the users, the
Yeah.
real users of Mirth Connect.
Yep.
We take a different approach.
Yep.
We want to foster the community. We want to have a bi-directional communication. We want to take not only code, but other things like methodology development, documentation, and
Hmm.
other things. And then we want to provide back to the community a good, solid interface engine that is functional and usable, and is reflective of the request from our community. And then for us, that value will ultimately lead to success in our company, because we're going to be the experts in the product. We will offer, our core is BridgeLink. We will offer those plugins, those enterprise level plugins that extend the product, that make it better, that make it more friendly to enterprise
Hmm.
use. And
Hmm.
then ultimately that'll lead to our managed service, which is Lightswitch.
Yeah. From what I'm hearing, Loyd, it all just kind of comes down to almost like a relationship. When you have a good, solid foundation of a relationship, you're talking on both parties. Both parties have input with one another, and you guys are opening up that doorway that has previously been closed to most of the other community, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, certainly from my perspective, it was closed. And I think
Hmm.
with the with the change in the branding becoming BridgeLink, but also other things like building governance around your community. What are the rules of the road, and
Hmm.
having a sponsor that can help develop those, and then engaging with the community in a very active way. We have a technical advisory board that's made up of members globally, as well as across a very large spectrum of different interests. And we have academics in there. We have health information exchanges. We have digital health. We have an oncology center on our technical advisory board. We have experts in the space. it just continues to grow, and building that relationship. That's the core, building that community. I didn't coin this phrase, but I like to use it. It's all about tending the hive. And if you tend your hive, the hive will produce honey for you. And I can say our growth is right now exponential, and it's attributed directly to March 18th.
Yep. Yep. That was actually kind of my, I was going to tip in and say, what's the most important decision you had to make as CEO? And I think we've already had our answer.
Yeah, I think March 18th was that was
We'll call it D-Day.
it was D-Day. It really wasn't a decision, Ben. It was a survival. I mean, if we wanted to continue we had a
Yeah.
threat to our business,
Yep.
and if we did not react, then there would be no Innovar today. That customer base would begin to shrink. Instead, we've had the opposite effect. We that customer base is growing. We get
Yeah.
called daily.
Yeah. Yeah. For the listeners out there, Loyd's business, it seems, is even just really trying to keep up with all the demand. It seems like they're just really having a ton of customers just coming and flooding in and to the point where Loyd's like, man, I need more staff.
Yeah, we're actually working on bringing more folks in now, and we're transitioning from a really small startup, few people, more to a more established startup, more folks, more structure, more methodology. We're moving from bootstrap startup culture
Mm-hmm.
to something a little more structured than that, and
Next level.
it's the next level. Obviously, there's pain involved, as you make these changes, and you have to introduce structure as you grow. But hopefully, I think over the past 7 years, we've laid the foundation, and it's all there. And so now it's just building on the foundation that we already have done.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are not new to the space in a sense. I mean, you're shifting, you're taking the fork in the road that you think is going to be the one that's more beneficial to the people.
Yeah, I mean, I have a really good example to pull from. My Mirth when I started Mirth, I started with 3 people,
Mm-hmm.
and we grew substantially. At one time I had 55. And so, and that was just in a few short years. So I've got a template for this, and I'm using the same template, rolling out the same methodologies, the same procedures, operations, trying to mimic it as best we can. I am in the South, so we try to have that Southern twist. Mirth
You
was
would
based
say
in
hospitality.
There you go.
Yeah,
But we joke around. We say we're the Mirth of the South.
I like that. I like that. I hope that gets you more sales.
We think it will. Well, and we're not looking just in domestically. We're looking international. And
Yeah.
frankly, we've had a lot more interest in Europe and more business coming from Europe than in the United States. So, was a little surprising, but there's a lot of users in Europe that are very open to the idea of
Mm-hmm.
bridge link, and
Mm-hmm.
and we had a call this morning with the South Pacific, with a country there,
Oh my
talking about
goodness.
bridge link. So it's global
Yeah. Yeah. You're not constrained. You're not limited.
in any way.
What do you, so, I've got a couple, this is kind of another deep kind of topic about kind of where things are heading. But how do you, with this very highly regulated industry, how are you balancing direction in your innovation and compliance and security? And how do you see that changing with the health data exchange industry, 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think first, with my history working with a number of health information exchanges around the country, seeing and being exposed to different methods, different ways of managing things like consent, or other governance type data governance structures. I think I have a really good to set the company on a forward path when it comes to that structure. And so I have some good examples to pull from. I think that TEFCA, the Trusted
Mm-hmm.
Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, TEFCA, And this
Mm-hmm.
idea of QHINs, which is building national networks, is probably the biggest change that we're going to see. Last week we had the ONC and our president and administration talk about patient-centered APIs. That's going to work with the QHINs, and I'm not quite sure how this is all going to land.
Mm-hmm.
I frankly had my doubts on the idea that TEFCA could even be successful.
Okay.
2 years ago, I would have guessed and said, no, it's going to fail. And even early last year, we had some announcements late last year and then this year. And then with the Trump administration, I wasn't sure, even if they would continue with TEFCA. I had my
Mm-hmm.
doubts. I mean, it seems like they've doubled down on it and they've
Mm-hmm.
made it really patient centric, which I think is a good move.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those pieces, and then that with your care quality, which is your national networks, care quality, Commonwealth, eHealth, that all serve different purposes, all woven together. Over the next 3 to 5 years, things will be significantly different, and I think
Yeah.
it will drive massive business to us because
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about any of these federal initiatives, they all need connectivity, they all need interfaces to make it work. You're talking about a
Mm-hmm.
patient-centered API. Well, somebody's got to do that software, and that's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a complex scene as well as with the political landscape of kind of where things are trending.
It's very complex and gotten much more complex this year with some unknowns and changing investments by the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
It's causing disruption and with some of our customers. There's a lot out there. I think things will settle into next year, and we'll have a more predictable path moving forward.
Sounds like the perfect year to make a massive shift in your business.
Yeah.
March 18th. March 18th, still D-Day. Um, what do you, so obviously we're talking about these different trends impacting your business and growth, but what would you say, just give the listeners an idea of what's working well with your business right now? And also, the flip side of kind of the most frustrating thing, the thing that you would actually, whatever you feel comfortable sharing kind of with the listeners that we have, big pros of your business, big cons of your business right now.
Well, I think, and less so now, but certainly over the past 2 years, and there's still some pain. We started out as we had Lightswitch, and that was our managed service, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
and great, Lightswitch was a good platform, but it didn't keep the lights on, no pun intended, right?
Ah,
So we had to
nice.
do services, and we started out with 95% of our business was primarily services driven. And,
Mm-hmm.
the typical, put a dime in, get a piece of gum out stuff, right? Over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And that rocked on for a couple of years. About 3 years ago, 5 years ago, we began to transition away from that traditional services model and more to the SaaS model and the managed service model that we're in now, which is really about recurring revenue. And we started that transition. We're at about 90% SaaS now, 80 to 90% SaaS. And we want ultimately, and I think we are where we need to be because, we use services to seed our customers. I mean, seeds our pipeline. And so we use services. That small service engagement eventually turns into maybe a bridge link install. It may turn into
Yeah.
selling plugins, and ultimately it'll turn into Lightswitch. It takes a little more time, but you break the glass with the small services engagement. So that 90% is probably going to be pretty consistent over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really where you know kind of how the business is structured, and I think how we'll grow moving forward. The challenge is with services, as you transition to SaaS, you begin to see a gap in revenue. And
Mm-hmm.
the SaaS model is a long-term model, right? Essentially you're amortizing the cost of an interface over a 3 to 5 year period,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so and I didn't know this was going to happen, but I began to see it as you begin to transition to SaaS. You begin to see that gap, and
Mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago that was relatively painful.
Yeah. Tightening the belt.
Tightening the belt, we had to do that, and we continued to grow, but it was definitely a change. But it was important for the long term sustainability of the business. And so we made that transition. I think we're where we are where we need to be right now. But at some point, we may make further changes and adjustments. Primarily the mix is 80 to 90% SaaS, and then 10 to 20% legacy services. And that's was our biggest threat. That and kind of next gen throwing us under the bus.
Yeah. Well, what do you see kind of obviously moving forward, like 6 to 12 months from now? Where do you hope the Innovar, this time next year, where do you guys see yourself?
We're on a journey with the BridgeLink product. And so today, particularly prior to 454, BridgeLink was really, and Mirth Connect prior to that, BridgeLink was more about an interface engine, right? And that was great.
Mm-hmm.
It did, that's the bread and butter stuff, which is filtering, transforming, developing logic, routing native to Bridge, to Mirth Connect and to BridgeLink was great. But we want to move that product from just your classic interface engine development platform that anyone uses, that developers tend to use. We want to move that from an engine to a platform. And the dynamic lookup gateway is one example of that shift to a platform. The dynamic lookup gateway allows you to build standard code sets in the system. We introduce a new concept in BridgeLink, and that is this concept of making those mappings available external to BridgeLink through what's called an API, which is the ability to query those code sets. So suddenly you've got this platform that allows you to standardize across your code sets across your organization. Every hospital struggles with this. That's standard, and particularly the larger organizations, they all struggle with standardization. We believe that the DLG will answer some of that, and we're going to continue down the path with BridgeLink to continue to introduce a shift from that product as just your classic interface engine more toward a platform. And that's what we're going to do over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. Okay. Man, that's great. What do you think about, we kind of talked off camera about this, but like the community engagement, like how is Innovar getting its name out there as we kind of close up talking on today?
Sure. So we early on, when we understood that the NextGen was going to close the source, we took a few steps. Number one, we brought in a Slack channel for BridgeLink because we frankly was not sure if NextGen was going to actually close their Slack channel, which would have left us all out on an island. So we rolled in the Slack channel. We introduced, some of the other tools. We've got a portal where the repository sits. We can log issues there. You can log problems. You can comment. You can communicate and collaborate. And we continually layer those things in. We continue to engage with the advisory board. They really drive governance for the BridgeLink product. And then we're continuing to engage with our community and our community users, not just in the form of the advisory board, but we also have, and those meetings happen on a monthly basis. We also have quarterly meetings with the broader community, and we have global participation in those community meetings. We share that out on YouTube so anyone can look at it, can watch, what we're doing. And then hopefully we're just going to continue to grow our user base and continue to collaborate with the community, continue to attend our Hive such that we can make BridgeLink, we can move BridgeLink into more current platforms to make it more future proof and try to work on some changes in the product such that it makes it friendlier and easier to use and not just the platform as it stands today, which is frankly, some would argue, 10 to 15 years dated.
Yeah. How to bring it into the 21st.
Yeah, bring it to the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of close out, Loyd, any other thoughts that you kind of want to share with the public just about Innovar, what they're doing in the space, and kind of dreams and aspirations?
Well, I think a big move for us, and we should be in production use next week as we're entering the Athena marketplace. So your listeners can, and will actually be able to pull our interfaces from the Athena marketplace, and you can install those. We hope to get those as close to one-click install as possible. And so look for us there. We're also in the Veradigm marketplace, which is all scripts. So you can look for us there as well. We're going to grow in the marketplaces. You'll see us in various marketplaces, and we've been in this for over 2 years. If you're in an IT group out there and you need a bridge link or an interface engine or a Mirth Connect derivative, you can go to the AWS marketplace and you can search for BridgeLink or Mirth Connect on the AWS marketplace, and it's pretty close to a one-click install. So you kind of have a working interface platform in a couple of minutes. And we've done that work. We're out there. You can see us on the AWS marketplace. You can see us in the Athena marketplace, and you can see us in the Veridon marketplace. And that's where we're going to.
And what I'm hearing is access is key, and you're getting into the right spots to be able to be found.
Yeah, we want to be found.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that does it for today. Loyd, thanks for joining the podcast. Thanks for sharing your insights, and really excited to see where Innovar kind of progresses from this point on.
I appreciate you spending the time with me. Thank you for allowing me to speak. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us. And you can also find us www.innovarhealthcare.com, or you can email our sales group, sales@innovarhealthcare.com.
Yep, and I'll put that definitely in the link in the description once we get this kind of set up. Thanks, Loyd.
All right. Thank you.